work. Okay, so today we're going to talk about 400 years in one day, in 1 hour, between the Old Testament and New Testament. And all this is setting things, how God set things up for the Savior to come. Because when we leave Malachi, they're in Israel, they're rebuilding the temple. Persia is starting to come into power, taking over the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and so Persia is a big power, getting to be a big power. And so Israel is under the Persians. And the Persians are okay with them. They pretty much let the Jews practice their religion, whichever way they want. And so it's a time of relative peace. At this point, Greece is not a country; it's city-states. So you have the Athenians, the Spartans, who hate each other, but they're all city-states, not a Greece. Persia and Egypt fight a lot. Let me pass out this map. This actually is a little bit later period of time, but I'm going to just pass the whole file because I expect we may have more Shiries coming down there. So if you look, the yellowish thing down in the Ptolemaic Kingdom and Seleucid, that's basically where the Persians and the Egyptians are, and you don't go across that desert, you don't go across Arabia, so what's in the middle of them? You got Israel. They keep fighting back and forth. Good morning. Come on. They keep fighting back and forth through Israel. So Israel just keeps changing who is in charge of them. In the meantime, there is this guy named Philip in Macedonia, which is north of Greece. And he starts taking over Greece, city by city. He finally unites Greece into a country for a while. But he's assassinated and his kid takes over, named Alexander. Alexander wants to take over the world, so he starts his conquest. And he goes through Turkey, and then he starts heading down the coast. And what's down the coast from Turkey?
Greece. No.
Israel. He's heading to Israel. He sends a note to Jerusalem saying, I want you to pledge your loyalty to me. And Israel says, no, can't do that. We promised we'd follow Darius. Well, Alexander's still coming through, and now he's not happy. Cinnamon rolls.
Okay.
So he's going to destroy them because wherever he goes, he just takes it over. But he has a dream. According to Josephus, in this dream, he dreams he sees this man in purple, and this man encourages him to go on with his conquest, that he will be successful. This is part of his dream. In the meantime, the high priest in Israel, Joshua, God gives him a dream and says, put on your purple robe, put on your gold, I don't know what would you call it, the thing on his cap that had the name of God, like we learned in Exodus. Put that on. When Alexander comes, you go meet him in this. So he walks out when Alexander's coming, and Alexander just falls on his face and worships the God that that Jadua worships. And he shows hostility to the Samaritans, but he lets the Jews continue in their religious practices. He doesn't make the Jewish men join his army, which is what he would typically do. He went through countries and he just made all the men join the army, not the Jews. And he respected their Sabbaths. So God was protecting them. In the meantime, Alexander just keeps going through, and he goes and conquers Egypt. And he founds a city there called Alexandria. Actually, everywhere he goes, he founds a city named Alexandria. But Alexandria, Egypt, is a huge city, an important city. It becomes the largest center of Jewish population outside of Israel. It is also probably where Mary and Joseph took Jesus into this city that Alexander founded, but again, it has a huge Jewish population. God is already setting things up. In the meantime, the Jews are surrounded by a whole new world. Alexander's conquering everything around them. For once, the guys to the south and the east and the north, it's all one group. But then Alexander dies. And he doesn't say who is going to follow him as ruler. So his generals argue over who's going to be the ruler. And when generals argue, how do they argue?
War.
Yeah, they got armies. Wars going on all over the place. So long, complicated wars with the Jews caught in the middle again. So one of the generals is named Ptolemy, and he ends up taking over Egypt. He is the ancestor of all those Cleopatras that we know about. Ptolemy becomes a name for the Pharaoh. So he is named Pharaoh. His descendants are pharaohs. The daughters tend to be named Cleopatra. So we usually, and this is about 300 BC. So we usually think of the pharaohs going back centuries and centuries in one family. No, this is a new family since 300. A guy named Seleucus takes over all the Asian lands. And then the other two generals have other lands. But those are the two we're going to deal with a lot. The Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire. Because they're the ones that are going to fight over Egypt or Israel a lot. And they both claim Israel as their empire. So poor Israel just stuck in the middle. Now we get to the 300 to 200 year range. So remember, both those generals were Macedonian, which is northern Greece. So they had a lot of Greek influence. They start building new cities that have Greek gymnasiums and Greek forms of government. Now gymnasiums in a Jewish land, one of the things about gymnasiums and things like wrestling and stuff, the guys would do it nude. Jews didn't like that kind of stuff. So they were a little unhappy with that kind of stuff. But in the meantime, the Jews that kind of would go along with things, they became exporters of things. Grain and oil and wine and cheese and fruit and fish. Those were all exports from Israel. So the Jewish population is doing and increasing. But what about those Romans? They are just coming into power. And they're going to grow and grow in world power. But at this point, they're just there. And almost every ancient civilization that we've talked about, all those ites are gone, except the Jews. God preserves the Jews during this. And the Jews do a really good job of maintaining their worship of God. And they stay away from the Greek gods. So, good job. So during this time, of course, they had to pay taxes. Now, taxes were done in a way that is way different than what we do now. Someone would buy the right to collect taxes. And they could collect as many taxes as they wanted. The government didn't say collect this much. They would just get as much as they could. And a guy named Joseph ben Tobias, he bought it. And he became powerful and more powerful. And he would cheat everybody. And of course, he was hated. And he also accepted the Greek way of doing things. And when you accept the Greek way of doing things, it became known as Hellenizing. And in the meantime, those Ptolemies and Seleucids keep fighting over Israel, or Israel, right in the middle. It's at this point that the rabbis write the Mishnah. And that is the oral explanation of the Jewish scriptures up to that point. That's where they start adding all those things. I kind of think that maybe they were doing it because, well, they'd been captured because they weren't obeying the laws. They were captured by the Babylonians and the Assyrians for the northern kingdoms, and they said they were thinking, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to make sure we obey God's laws. So they put a lot more detail into it than God said. They were going to make sure they obeyed the laws. Later, they're going to write the Talmud, which explains it even more. So they're going to make sure they got it. So that takes us through the years 300 to 200. Now we're in the years 200 to 100. So you can see how everything's still divided. The empire for the Seleucids is under a guy named Antiochus, and that's the family name. You have the Ptolemies in Egypt, you have Antiochus in Seleucia. Antiochus III wants to take over the world. Only one thing in his way: Rome. Rome is rising in power, and Rome wants to take over the world. So you got Rome and the Seleucids fighting each other. In the meantime, in Israel, they're starting to divide into different factions. Different beliefs and sects. Now, most of the people didn't care. They weren't going to join these factions. They just wanted to get their work done. They knew they were going to pay taxes. They just didn't care who they were going to pay taxes to. It just changed all the time. But they were going on with life. And then comes a new king for the Seleucids. Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes. Epiphanes means the visible God. He saw himself as Zeus. People would make fun of him behind his back and call him Epimanes, which means the madman. So, since Israel bordered Egypt, Antiochus really wanted to make sure Israel was secure. So he was trying to push them more and more into the Greek following, the Hellenizing. And he was approached by a group of Jews, and they said, we want you to remove the high priest and replace him with his brother who likes the Greeks, who's a Hellenizer. They were still both of the tribe of Aaron and Levites, so that was at least there, but the Jews were outraged because the government got involved with picking the high priest. And that they didn't want. Church and state. Yeah. That was never, ever, ever done. So they were mad, even though it is still at least a Levite. So the Jews would stay out of, most of them would stay calm until you start fooling with their religion. Also, there was a group that decided they were going to try to get Antiochus to like them, so they went to Antiochus and told him all about all the wealth in the temple, all the good stuff. So Antiochus wants this stuff. So these Hellenizers have control of the government, and they're building more gymnasiums, and they're encouraging all the kids, young guys, to go spend time at the gymnasium, which the Jews are not going to like. Even
for the Olympics.
Yeah, even young priests started engaging in sports, and again, they do it naked. It's not. People started having Greek names, wore Greek clothing. In fact, Jason, the priest that this group wanted to have, Jason's a Greek name. They were starting to adopt the Greek religion, which is worshiping gods, and their morals were relaxing. Sound kind of familiar? Happening today. Antiochus, he couldn't understand why anyone would not want to become Hellenized. He thought anyone that didn't, they were stiff-necked, stubborn people. And he didn't like them. So this guy comes along named Menelaus, which is also a great name. And he decides he wants to be high priest. He's not a Levite. He's not from the tribe of Aaron. But he promised Antiochus a lot of money. So Antiochus gives him the high priesthood. You can imagine how the Jews feel about that. Not only is the government involved in picking the high priest, he's not even the right tribe. And that was a really strict thing. Menelaus had no sympathy for Jewish tradition. He only cared about power. Now, he had promised to pay Antiochus a bunch of money, but he didn't have it all. And he was going to raid the temple to pay it, but the temple didn't have enough, the temple treasury. So he starts selling things off from within the temple. So the Jewish people are getting, all this is building up within the normal Jewish person. In And then Antiochus decides he's going to invade Egypt. And Rome says, no, you're not. And they fight, and the Romans prevent him from taking over Alexandria. So they keep him out. Antiochus is upset at this point, and he's going back, and the route back is back through Egypt, or back through Israel. He stops off in the temple of Israel. And he starts a persecution of the Jews. In Jaffa, a coastal town, they drowned 200 Jews, his soldiers. The Syrian army, Seleucid and Syria are together. So Syria is part of the Seleucid Empire. So they march into Jerusalem and they kill a lot of people. And a lot of people run to the hills. The only people that stayed behind are the people that had adopted the Greek ways. Yeah. Antiochus orders no Sabbath, no holy days, no circumcision. He erects a statue of Zeus in the temple over the altar. Then he sacrifices a pig on the altar. Can someone look up Daniel 11:31? Uh-huh.
Okay, I got it.
Okay.
His forces will rise up and
Desecrate
the temple fortress. They will abolish the regular sacrifice and set up the abomination of desolation.
Yeah. Okay, so this scripture in Daniel refers both to this. This is called the abomination of desolation. So Daniel prophesied that this would happen. But there's also a future abomination of desolation. So God is still within all this. He said this would happen. So as Hellenism, it gets more and more popular among the rich people, the regular people still keep to Judaism and the commandments. Now there's a new class forming among the people. They're called the Hasidim. In Jewish, that means the pious. It was a term used by the rabbis to describe those Jews that kept the highest standard of religious observance and moral action. We still have Hasidim today. Those are these.
Say the word again.
Hasidim. They
Hasidic?
are Hasidic.
Yeah.
They're the Hasidic.
They're very strict.
Very. They're the ones with the curls
long hair.
and yeah, very strict observation. But this is where they started. They were fed up with what was going on around them. So with Antiochus's edict, they had two choices: run or die. So thousands of these faithful Jews left their homes and fled to the hills. But a lot of their neighbors were the Hellenizers. And they didn't hesitate to betray them. If they showed up, they'd say, "There's one of them." Jew turned against Jew. Now, they would try to fight against them, but the Syrians soon learned, we'll just attack on Saturday. Because they would not fight back on a Saturday. They were wiping them out on the Sabbath. In the north part of, just northeast of Jerusalem, there was a town called Modin. And a guy named Mattathias and his 5 sons lived there. And they were among the most pious Jews. Another name for their family was the Hasmoneans. They were the priests of the village. So the Syrians show up to their town, and they go to the most public place, the town square, where they would usually meet for religious observances, and they erected an altar. And they brought a pig. And they ordered Mattathias to slaughter the pig and sacrifice it to Zeus in honor of Antiochus. Well, Mattathias didn't move. Now, a young Hellenized Jew said, I'll do it. And the intention was, after the sacrifice, that the Syrians would force the Jews to eat that pig. And if you refused, you'd be killed. At that point, Mattathias, who's pretty old, but he's standing next to the Syrian captain, and he grabs the captain's sword, and he kills the guy that said, I'll do it. And then as the captain moves to stop him, Mattathias kills him too. And the son of Mattathias rushes the soldiers, and, well, the 5 sons, rush the soldiers, and they kill them all with the help of some of the other Jews. And they tear down that altar and destroy it. Now Mattathias sent out a cry, saying, whoever is for God, let him come unto me. That cry went throughout the whole land, and across the hills and the caves and everywhere the Hasidim were hiding. They heard that cry, and they came. And Mattathias and his sons left Modin because they knew the Syrians would come back and try to get revenge. So this group of Hasidim started attacking Syrian soldiers. They made one change. They decided that they could fight back on the Sabbath. That God wouldn't want them to all just not fight back at all. So Mattathias dies. It's only like a year after they start the revolt, and so the leadership turns to his son, Judah. His son is given the nickname Judah the Hammer because he works like a hammer of God. Now in their language, the name is Maccabee. So if you ever heard of the Maccabees, this is them. And there are 2 books that are written called Maccabee 1, Maccabee 2. They aren't in our Bible, but they're in the Catholic Bible. They're part of what's called the Apocrypha, which are books from the time period between the Old and New Testament. They're basically the history of what's going on at this time. So the Syrians bring in one army after another, trying to corner this Jewish army, and God is protecting these guys. And the Jews, they fasted and prayed before every battle, and they gained victory after victory. And their army continues to grow because there's so many people that were so fed up with Antiochus. Antiochus knows he has a full-scale rebellion on his hands. In the meantime, in the area of Babylon, the original inhabitants of Babylon that were taken over by Seleucid, they're fed up with Antiochus. So they start a rebellion. So Antiochus has to battle two of them. So the ones up in, he's more concerned with the ones in Babylon. And so he underestimates the ones in Jerusalem or in Israel. And he doesn't come himself, and he sends two minor generals to finally wipe these guys out. And people were around outside of Israel thought, oh, there's no chance these Israelites are going to win. So they brought money to buy the Israelites as slaves because they were sure these guys were going to lose. Nope. In the middle of the night, Judah came with his armies against the Syrians, and he wiped that army out. They got tons of supplies, tons of booty. At this point, the road to Jerusalem was open, which, by the way, is the road to Emmaus. Same road. The Maccabees, they come singing into Jerusalem. That high priest Menelaus, he ran. And all the Hellenized residents, the pagan residents, they run. The Maccabees restore the temple. They clean it. They remove every sign of paganism and destroy the altar. They take that statue of Zeus and grind it down into dust, and they erect a new altar. On the 25th of Kislev, in the year of 165, they rededicated the temple, and they celebrated a feast for 8 days. This feast is called Hanukkah. That's where Hanukkah comes from. According to the Talmud, the priests only had enough of that beaten olive oil, where they had to have specific olive oil. They only had enough of that for 1 day. But God made that 1 day's worth of oil burn for 8 days. So Jews today still celebrate Hanukkah. Now, Hanukkah is a minor Jewish holiday. It has become more major here in the U.S. because of its closest to Christmas. That's the main thing. You know, it's not that big of a Jewish holiday.
Because like today's the 7th or 8th day of Hanukkah.
Hanukkah started last
Saturday or Sunday.
Saturday or Sunday, yeah. Sunday, because I remember that was the first day of Hanukkah, so should end tomorrow. But sometimes it comes right at Christmas, sometimes a little before, rarely after. But yeah, they still celebrate it today, but again, mainly because of Christmas.
Hanukkah was on Monday, last Monday.
Monday,
Yeah,
okay.
So today's
Started Monday. So it goes through Tuesday.
Saturday. Today's the 7th day.
Yeah.
6th.
Yeah.
6th day. Anyway,
Yeah.
we're in the middle of it.
Yeah, we are. Tradition says that they found that little bit of beaten oil in a bowl that was sealed with the signet ring of the high priest from the days of Samuel. So they say that one bowl is really old bowl. Out of this, about 100 years later, the menorah becomes the symbol of Judaism. But the Syrians are not happy. They are coming with larger numbers than the Jews had ever seen before. I guess they quelled the rebellion in Persia. So Judah gathers his entire force to face these Syrians. And the Israelites lose, and they retreat to Jerusalem for safety. And the Syrians lay siege to the city. In the meantime, while they're laying siege, they get word that there is a rebellion going on back in Syria. Back in the state, in their Syrian capital, as a matter of fact. So, anxious to be able to go back to Antioch, which is the city, so that he could defend it, he offers the Jews a peace treaty. And it looked pretty good. It said they would withdraw their laws against Judaism, they could do circumcision, all that other stuff. Menelaus wouldn't be the high priest anymore. Judah and his brothers wouldn't be punished for the rebellion and all their followers. But the walls of Jerusalem would be leveled. And Syria would still be in charge. A council was put together, and they thought, well, that sounds pretty good. But Judah disagreed. He didn't trust the Syrians. So he and a few of his followers left Jerusalem. But it didn't take long to find out that Judah was right. The Syrians appointed a new high priest. Menelaus was out, yeah, but they appointed another non-Levite priest named Alcimus. The Maccabean soldiers were disarmed. The wall was leveled. The new high priest had many of the leaders killed. And the people that they run to Judah and say, will you be in charge again? We were wrong. The high priest sends word to Syria and says, you need to send an army again. And Judah again starts fighting, and they're winning more victories. But Judah finally, the time runs out, and he's killed in battle. But there's still more brothers. His brothers fled across the Jordan River with a small army. And now his brother Jonathan leads the Maccabees. And he leads a small army that was constantly a threat to the Hellenized Jews and the Syrian forces. The Syrians failed to stop them again and again. Jonathan gains popularity with everyone in the country. They're ready to follow him. He wasn't quite a great military genius, but he was a great diplomat. Meantime, Syria has another civil war, so the Syrians go back to try to take care of that, and that gives Jonathan the chance to come back into the country. And Jonathan and his followers enter into an alliance with Rome. They knew better than to become a friend with Rome, but they knew they were Syria's enemy. And if they're friends with Rome, Syria would think twice about attacking them. So in 157 BC, they become an independent principality. Jonathan becomes a king and the high priest. When he dies, his brother Simon takes over leadership. And Simon's really old by this time. But he was known for his wisdom. And he decides to call together a group of leading Jews. Important priests, prominent family members, known leaders. This becomes the Sanhedrin. So he's the one that brought that in. Simon was too old to lead battles, so his sons led battles for him. And one of his sons was named John Hyrcanus. So when Simon dies, John becomes the high priest and the king. And he expands the territory. he goes down and conquers. On your map it says kind of an orange Nabatean kingdom. The people that live there are Edomites. Edomites are descended from Esau. Jacob and Esau. They're descended from Esau. So they're really, really, really distant relatives. When he conquers them, he forces them to become Jews, forces them to become circumcised and follow their religion. They didn't choose it; he forced it. At this point in Israel, this is when the political parties start. We got the Sadducees. They claim to be descendants of Solomon's high priest Zadok. They argued that national power had saved them and their religion, and they were all for forcing Judaism on pagans. They have a strict interpretation of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. If it's not in the Torah, they don't want to hear it. That's all they care about. They don't believe in an afterlife. They don't believe in angels. Then you got the Pharisees. They were opposed to expansion. In fact, it comes from the word parish, means to separate. They argued that it was the religion that saved the Jewish people. We, of course, know it was God. They wanted to persuade people to become Jewish, not force them. And they argued that there was an oral Torah, a set of traditions that had been handed down. So they believed in more than the first 5 books in the Bible. They believed in angels. They believed in an afterlife. So the Jews are settling under Hyrcanus, and he's not too bad because he remembered what it was like to be poor and on the run. But his sons and his descendants don't. They grew up in palaces. They don't have a lot of sympathy for the normal Jewish person. One of the descendants is Aristobulus, and as soon as he comes to power, he throws his 3 brothers into prison because he doesn't want them to take over. 2 of them supposedly starved to death. Nice brother, huh? A few months later, another brother that didn't get thrown into prison, he's the one that probably should have been, he kills Aristobulus. And the Jews are breathing a sigh of relief because they didn't like Aristobulus. But it doesn't get any better. Now we're into the 100s. So one of the brothers, Alexander Janus, had been in the prison. He becomes the king. And he extends the boundaries of Jerusalem. He campaigns against the Arabs in the south. But he loses his army and the Pharisees. And this family tended to like the Sadducees and not the Pharisees. So the Pharisees sees the opportunity that comes when Aristobulus loses his army. So, Alexander Janus. Alexander was officiating as a high priest at the temple because you're high priest and king at that time. And people struck him with fruits. Started throwing fruits at him. Mainly pomegranates. Imagine how that would feel. I mean, pomegranates at you. He was not happy. He ordered the execution of hundreds of defenseless people. At one party, he crucified 800 Pharisees. This was first widespread use of the cross in Judea. He's on his deathbed, and his kids are too young to take over. So he advises his wife, who is going to be the regent until the sons grow up, tells her, get rid of the Sadducee advisors, make friends with the Pharisees, which he did. And the Pharisees end up being pretty good. They improved the government, they reformed the judicial system, they established the school law where every young man was required to get an education. Sadducees are not happy. They think they're the only ones that should be in power. The Pharisees have the support of the people, and but the army and the wealthy people were on the Sadducean side. When Jesus comes along, it always seems like the Pharisees and Sadducees are working together. They hate each other. The only thing they could agree on was Jesus needed to die. That's how much they hated Jesus, that they would work together after all these times of fighting and killing each other. Salome somehow managed to keep peace between them, but when she died, civil war breaks out. Her son, Hyrcanus, was already the high priest, but her brother wanted to be the king. Hyrcanus really didn't care about being king, but tradition had you were king and high priest. But most of Hyrcanus's army went over to the brother because he was better looking. Good reason. Hyrcanus said, I really didn't ever want the throne anyway, so I'm okay with this. But this guy named Antipater steps in. Antipater is an Edomite. So remember, they were the group that was forced to become Jews.
But they also didn't like the Jewish people at all.
No.
And weren't they the one?
Their history goes back to they think that their land is stolen from them by Jacob.
Right. Jacob.
Yeah, so they didn't like him, but they were forced. So, but Antipater is smooth. He wants power. And he kind of seizes on to Hyrcanus, who's kind of a weak guy. He just wants to be a priest and not aspire to anything. But Antipater convinces him to lead an army that will put him back into power. His brother didn't expect that, and he kind of got surprised, so he shuts himself up in Jerusalem for a long siege. Those Romans are still around, though. Pompey is a general, you've probably heard the name. He's a general leading an army up in Syria, and he hears about this conflict between these two brothers, and he gets involved. Some leaders from Jerusalem come to him and say, we need you to decide which brother is going to be king. So the Israelites are inviting the Romans in again. Antipater sees an opportunity here. He sends Pompey a vine of pure gold as a gift. It's such a pretty and valuable thing that Pompey sends it back to Rome to put into a temple. Antipater hopes he's influencing Pompey to choose Hyrcanus. In the meantime, another group of Pharisees goes to Pompey and asks him to get rid of both brothers. Just get rid of them both. And let us go back to our original government high priest rule. So Pompey decides he's going to do something about it. He marches into Judea. He lays siege on Jerusalem. Aristobulus, the brother, surrenders. But the Sadducees say, we're not opening that gate to these Romans. But the Romans are good at getting in where you don't want them. And they got in. The Sadducees withdraw into the temple, and they keep up their sacrifices. And as one priest fell to the sword, another one would take its place. And they say about 12,000 Jews died that day. When it's over, Pompey enters the temple, and he even goes in the Holy of Holies. Makes you wonder, why didn't God strike him dead? But he didn't. So Pompey makes a decision. Rome. Neither brother. He rules in favor of Rome. It was the end of their independence. This is why the Romans were in charge of Israel at the time of Jesus. Hyrcanus is chosen as the puppet ethnarch, not a king. And Judea was now a Roman province. And Antipater is assigned as the high priest, as the prime minister. In fact, Pompey drags Aristobulus and his two sons to Rome in one of those victory parade things. Look what I captured. Antipater knows where his bread is buttered, and he works with Rome. He appointed his older son, Phaziel, the governor of Jerusalem, and his younger son, Herod, as governor of Galilee. So remember where Herod's ancestry is. He's an Edomite who has been forced to become a Jew. In the meantime, the Pharisees and Sadducees, they want to drive out those Romans. It's already starting. Rome says, well, let's just break this country up into 5 regions. So that's why we have Galilee and Samaria and 5 different areas of Jerusalem. So they can't unite and fight. Jewish patriots, they hide in the hills and they attack the Romans as they can. When we hear about zealots, that's what the zealots are. They're just attacking. Now Antipater and his sons, they tend to back the wrong guy. They backed Pompey. Well, Pompey gets defeated by Caesar. They backed Brutus, who is defeated by I forgot which one of the Caesars. He's defeated. Mark Antony. He keeps supporting all these guys that lose. But his family, they're so skilled at kissing up that they just keep managing to stay in power. You would think you'd keep backing these guys and someone's going to wipe you out. But nope, they're good. When Antipater dies, Herod and Phaziel are named tetrarchs. So they take over ruling the country. Eventually, Phaziel is attacked, and rather than be captured, he commits suicide. So Herod is left by himself. Herod knows that there's things going on, so he takes his family and he runs to southern Palestine, and he goes on to Egypt. He was hoping to get Mark Antony to help him, but Mark Antony wasn't there right then, but Cleopatra was, and she tries to seduce him, and he doesn't fall for it. He says, I need Mark Antony. So he's going to Rome. So Cleopatra becomes Herod's enemy. Cleopatra and Herod don't get along. So he gets to Rome and he's greeted warmly by Antony, and in the end, Herod is proclaimed the king of Judea. But at this point, he's the king without a country, because he's in Rome. And there's one of the Maccabees descendants is saying he's the king, so he had to go back and kick out this other king, and the Jews want the descendant of the Maccabees. They don't want an Edomite. But Rome backs Herod, and the Romans slaughter so many people that Herod had to bribe the Romans to stop, or he wouldn't have anyone to rule. So Herod takes over. He is actually, in some ways, he's a genius. He's one of those bad genius people. He starts rebuilding the temple, and the way he's rebuilding it's as magnificent as Solomon's temple was. He's putting in aqueducts. He's really the buildings he built are just beautiful. He built up Masada, palaces all over the place, but it was kind of crazy. He would do things like, well, he married one of the descendants of the Maccabees named Mariamne, and it seemed like he really loved her. But he was convinced that she was trying to take over his power. So she had him killed, and that just kind of drove him over the edge because he really loved her. He threw his kids into prison and had them, if he thought they were conspiring against him, he'd have them killed. Caesar said it's better to be one of Herod's dogs than his kids. So when Herod dies in 4 BC, his kingdom is split between 3 sons. But in the meantime, sometime between 6 and 4 BC, we get Jesus Christ. And God, and we know how the Herods fall into interacting with Jesus. And John the Baptist, and they tie into Jesus' story several times. And we've seen how why the Romans are there, and we've seen the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and God used everything to bring it to the point where the story was perfect for Jesus to come. So, it is 45. Okay, so that is the story of the intertestamental period.